Surf crashes on black lava. Clouds pull light across emerald ridges. Long before Chief of War and Hollywood headlines, Hawaii forged a real kingdom. Voyaging genius, Aliʻi rule, Kapu law, and blue water diplomacy. How did Kamehameha unite the islands? How did a literate state win treaties with great powers, then face missionaries and sugar? Tonight, we read chants and constitutions, following canoes to courthouses. We'll ask what was lost, what endured, and who gets to tell it. While Chief of War turns history into spectacle, we bring record and voices. Settle in. This is Hawaii's Lost Kingdom, the true history behind Jason Momoa's new show.
The Hawaiian Islands were settled by expert navigators who read the ocean like a map and the night sky like a book. Their canoes carried seeds, stories, and systems of law across thousands of miles, turning remote volcanoes into a connected world. What they built was not a postcard, but a polity, held together by genealogy, custom, and obligations that reached from chiefs to commoners and from mountain to sea. Power lived with the Aliʻi, bounded by Kapu. Stewardship flowed through the ahupua'a, ridges to reef, so that water, forests, fields, and fisheries sustained communities in balance. Knowledge was preserved in chant and practice, from the timing of plantings to the routes of birds and currents. This was governance as a living ecology, spiritual, legal, and practical at once. When Western ships arrived in the late 18th century, they brought iron, firearms, and diseases, but also new trade, new beliefs, and new leverage. Alliances shifted as quickly as the price of sandalwood. A rising leader named Kamehameha embraced innovation alongside tradition, reading both tides and tactics. In this crucible, Hawaii moved toward unification, and the world began to take notice. In the 19th century, the kingdom crafted constitutions, sent diplomats, and signed treaties with global powers. Missionaries launched schools, a literate public emerged. Printing presses turned out newspapers in Olelo, Hawaii. Honolulu became a Pacific crossroads where whalers, merchants, and ministers negotiated profit and principle, sometimes in the same afternoon. The kingdom's story is not a tale of isolation cracking under contact, but of selective adoption, assertion, and statecraft. And yet, the currents that carried Hawaii into the modern world also pulled hard: land privatization, plantation capital, strategic interest from abroad. By the century's end, a queen would try to restore royal authority. A coup would overturn it, and annexation would fold the islands into another nation's flag. What was lost is measured, not only in laws and lands, but in language and the right to decide. Today, film and television return to this past, most recently through Chief of War. Drama can open a door, but only the record can light the room. In this documentary, we will follow the sources: chants and letters, constitutions and court cases, petitions and eyewitness narratives. We will listen to Kanaka Maoli voices that span centuries, and we will place legend beside ledger until the outlines sharpen. This is the story of a Pacific kingdom that rose by design, endured by knowledge, and was challenged by forces larger than itself. To understand what Hawaii was and why it still matters, we begin at the beginning, the rise of the Hawaiian Kingdom.
If you're enjoying real history behind the myths, please subscribe and ring the bell. Become a member for early chapters and behind the scenes.
Your support funds maps, sources, and field filming. Visit our shop if you'd like to help us keep sailing. Thank you for keeping this voyage afloat.
Chapter 1. The Rise of the Hawaiian Kingdom.
The story of the Hawaiian Kingdom begins with strategy as much as strength. In the late 18th century, rival chiefs ruled separate islands, forming shifting alliances and testing each other's resolve across narrow channels and long memories. Into this landscape stepped Kamehameha, a leader who read people the way a navigator reads the sea, watching for swells, anticipating turns, and moving first when the current changed. Kamehameha's rise blended tradition with innovation. He cultivated koa warriors and expert canoe builders. He honored the gods with heiau and protocol. He forged marriages and alliances that bound power by kinship. At the same time, he adopted foreign technologies when they fit the Hawaiian world. Muskets and cannon did not replace seamanship and courage, but, trained and positioned well, they added reach and shock. Advisors from abroad taught drills and gunnery. Hawaiian crews mastered them quickly. The point was never to imitate a foreign army, it was to augment Hawaiian strengths with any tool that could shorten a battle and save his aliʻi and people. Campaigns unfolded island by island. Battles like Mokuʻōhai, Kepeniwai, and Nu'uanu became milestones not only for their outcomes, but for what they revealed. Logistics over distance, the decisive use of choke points and heights, and the morale-shifting effect of well-sighted artillery. On Oʻahu, the windward cliffs turned momentum into surrender as forces were pressed toward the precipice. Yet not every victory came from force of arms. Diplomacy, the quiet pressure of envoys and promises kept, brought Kauai and Niʻihau into the fold, completing a unification that war alone could not secure. Conquest without consolidation is only a pause. Kamehameha's real achievement was to turn victory into governance. He respected the kohale of each district and maintained the chiefly order, but centralized authority where it mattered: control of ports, management of the sandalwood trade, and the collection of resources needed to feed warriors and repair canoes. The traditional ahupua'a system, ridge to reef, continued to shape stewardship, while new royal directives clarified who could harvest what, where, and when. Chiefs expected loyalty, commoners expected protection, the king expected order that allowed ships to dock and taxes to move. Law anchored legitimacy. The Kanawai Mamalahoi, the law of the splintered paddle, proclaimed that non-combatants should be safe on the roads, that farmers and fishers should not be dragged into the violence of chiefs. It was both a moral statement and a practical one. Prosperity depends on people being able to work without fear. Sanctuary traditions at Pu'uhonua endured, even as the state centralized power. Mercy and protection were not signs of weakness, but of a durable realm confident enough to restrain itself. Religion and statecraft remained entwined. Building and dedicating major heiau during this era signaled divine favor and political intent. Priests guarded ritual knowledge, not as decoration, but as a framework for timing campaigns, declaring taboos, and unifying the realm in ceremony. In this synthesis, protocol, logistics, warfare, and worship, the kingdom presented itself as more than a conqueror's prize. It was a lawful order with roots deep enough to hold and flexible enough to adapt. Externally, the world was changing fast. Ships from the Americas and Europe circled the Pacific, hunting whales, seeking ports, and calculating advantage. Kamehameha managed contact with a measured hand, welcoming trade, insisting on respect for Hawaiian authority, and using the flow of goods and knowledge to reinforce his position. Foreigners could advise and barter, they could not rule. Standards were set, infractions punished, and concessions weighed against the long game of sovereignty. By the time Kamehameha's unification was complete, Hawaii had become a singular political actor in the North Pacific. Tribute and loyalty ran through a recognized court. Royal residences and storehouses became centers of redistribution. Decision-making concentrated around a ruler who kept both battle-tested chiefs and seasoned advisors close, translating victory into stability. The kingdom was not yet the treaty-bearing state it would become, but its foundations were laid: a central authority, a controlled economy, a clear legal voice, and a leadership class trained to weigh tradition against the practicalities of a globalizing ocean. The succession plan mattered as much as the first victories. A kingdom built on one exceptional personality risks fading with him. Kamehameha's arrangements for heirs and trusted regents signaled a different intention: continuity. The monarchy would not be a camp that disbanded after the war. It would be a house with rules, roles, and rooms large enough to hold a modernizing future. When foreign captains arrived, they increasingly recognized not a loose collection of islands, but a government with protocols: audiences, permissions, and negotiations handled by people authorized to speak for more than themselves. The rise of the Hawaiian Kingdom, then, is a story of design. It is logistics, law, and legitimacy, woven with chant and ceremony, sharpened by innovation, and secured by leaders who could navigate both the reef and the ledger. With the islands united and the court established, the next chapter turns from steel and stone to paper and ink, from battlefields to boardrooms. Recognition abroad will require more than courage. It will require signatures, seals, and a public that can read them.
Next up, fancy uniforms, foreign ministers, and a kingdom that starts collecting treaties, like shells on a Waikiki morning. Chapter 2. The Golden Age and International Recognition.
Unification gave Hawaii a single voice. The 19th century taught it how to speak that voice in the language of nations. Courts, councils, and ministries took shape, translating chiefly authority into cabinet portfolios and regular procedures. Protocols, audiences, papers, seals, signaled that visitors were meeting a government, not merely a ruler. What began as a coalition around a great chief matured into a constitutional monarchy able to negotiate, legislate, and judge according to published law. Constitutions marked this transformation. Early charters set out the king's powers, established a legislature, and recognized rights for subjects both high and low. Revisions refined the balance: how ministers were appointed, how taxes were levied, how courts handled disputes. The effect was cumulative. Each document told foreign powers that Hawaii could bind itself by rules, and that those rules were legible to the world's chancelleries. Diplomacy traveled by sail, signature, and stamina. Hawaiian envoys crossed oceans to win formal recognition, arguing that the kingdom was a sovereign Pacific state with stable institutions. Letters of credence opened doors. Patient persuasion did the rest. Declarations of recognition followed, and with them a web of treaties on friendship, commerce, and navigation. Consulates appeared in Honolulu and abroad, handling passports, shipping, and the minor crises that prove a flag really flies. Law followed recognition as closely as shadow follows canoe. A high court clarified precedent, and lower courts standardized practice. A land commission translated customary tenure into deeds intelligible to foreign merchants, while trying, imperfectly, to honor older obligations. Jurors heard cases, notaries witnessed contracts, appeals taught litigants why procedure matters. It was not law imported whole, but Hawaiian governance adapted to an ocean-spanning marketplace. Education was the quiet engine of state. Mission schools and royal initiatives produced a literate public that read laws, petitions, and, most importantly, newspapers in Olelo, Hawaii. Printing presses multiplied voices. Debates over policy and faith spilled into columns and letters to the editor. Literacy did more than elevate prestige. It created a population capable of participating in a constitutional order and of holding its leaders to published promises. Commerce turned the harbor into a hinge of the Pacific. Whaling ships refitted in season, merchants brokered timber, hides, and later sugar. Harbor rules, customs houses, and a budding postal system kept people and goods accounted for. Revenue financed roads, lighthouses, and public works. Tariffs and tonnage fees underwrote the very institutions that made the port attractive. Foreign captains learned that port calls required compliance, and that compliance brought predictability. Religion and diplomacy intertwined, sometimes uneasily. Missionaries opened schools and printed tracts. Ministers of state drafted dispatches and balanced concessions. The court navigated these crosswinds with a pragmatic keel, welcome the literacy, regulate the zeal, and keep ultimate authority in Hawaiian hands. Royal patronage of education and healthcare coexisted with firm statements of sovereignty, signals to citizens and foreigners alike that Hawaii could both modernize and decide. The Golden Age shone brightest when ceremony met substance. Royal audiences followed precise etiquette, but beneath the choreography lay practical arrangements, custom schedules, quarantine rules, pilotage fees, and the protocols that keep multi-ethnic ports from chaos. Flags, coats of arms, and orders of merit were not mere theater. They were the visual grammar of international life, helping ships, consuls, and courts read the kingdom at a glance. None of this erased vulnerability. Epidemics took a terrible toll. The plantation economy's rise began to concentrate wealth and leverage. Yet the accomplishment remains extraordinary. A Polynesian kingdom, literate and law-governed, securing treaty recognition across 2 hemispheres and conducting its affairs as a peer among powers far larger than itself. Where others saw a paradise to be visited, Hawaii presented a polity to be respected.
Next, sermons, sugar, and a bayonet no one wants to wear. Chapter 3. Shadows of Empire.
Contact did not arrive as a single ship and depart at dusk. It unpacked trunks and stayed. Missionaries built churches and schools, merchants opened counting houses, planters surveyed valleys for water and cane. Ideas, ledgers, and laws braided into a new order that rewarded capital, demanded labor, and quietly redefined who held leverage in a sovereign Polynesian kingdom. The missionary story is complicated. Many came with genuine religious conviction and helped establish literacy and printing on a wide scale. Hawaiian newspapers became vigorous forums where policy and theology were debated in Olelo, Hawaii. Over time, however, prominent missionary families moved from pulpits to boardrooms, investing in land and sugar and pressing for governance that favored property and predictability. The result was not a simple conquest of faith over culture, but an alliance of conscience and commerce whose priorities often ran ahead of the monarchies. Land was the fulcrum. The 1848 Mahele attempted to translate a web of customary relationships, chiefs, commoners, and the land itself, into categories legible to the modern world: crown lands, government lands, and private holdings. A land commission heard claims. Maps drew lines where reciprocal obligations had once flowed. The Kuleana Act that followed allowed commoners to secure small plots in fee simple. Yet the process required surveys, fees, and comfort with paperwork alien to many maka'ainana. In practice, significant acreage consolidated into chiefly estates and increasingly into corporate hands. What law intended as clarity often became the path by which outsiders and the well-capitalized accumulated control. Sugar changed the island's economy, rivers, and politics. Cane demanded flat land, dependable water, mills, and capital. Ditches and flumes rerouted streams, hillsides once terraced for kalo fed rollers and boilers instead. Profits depended on export, and export depended on access to the biggest nearby market. The Reciprocity Treaty of 1875 eased Hawaiian sugar into the United States with reduced duties. A later agreement granted U.S. rights at Pearl Harbor in exchange for continued access. With tariffs tamed and a coaling station rising, the business case brightened, and so did the geopolitical glare. Labor followed the cane. Plantations recruited contract workers across the Pacific and beyond. Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, later Puerto Rican and Filipino laborers, each group carrying languages, foods, and faiths that remade neighborhood soundscapes. Contracts set hours, pay, and penalties. Overseers and courts enforced them. Some laborers found paths to small business and community life. Many endured rigid regimes in fields and company camps. The social mosaic that defines modern Hawaii took shape under plantation whistles, even as the system that created it deepened dependence on foreign markets and laws.
As sugar fortunes swelled, political reformers allied with business interests argued that stability required a tighter rein on royal authority. The 1887 Constitution, nicknamed the Bayonet Constitution for the pressure used to secure it, sharply limited the monarch's power, shifted authority to a cabinet and legislature aligned with the planter elite, and imposed property or income requirements that narrowed the electorate. Native Hawaiians with means continued to vote, but many were squeezed by the new thresholds. Asian residents were largely excluded. Certain foreign residents gained influence disproportionate to their numbers by taking oaths and meeting property tests. The letter of constitutionalism remained, its spirit tilted toward those with capital and connections. Courts and consuls became daily actors in high politics. Disputes over tariffs, leases, and labor contracts poured through a legal system increasingly framed to reassure external investors. Foreign consuls pressed claims for their nationals and signaled the interests of distant capitals. Newspaper wars amplified every crisis, and rumor traveled the waterfront at the speed of canvas and coal. Honolulu's harbor, once a hinge for voyaging canoes and whaling ships, now turned on sugar prices, insurance rates, and the schedules of steamers and warships. Strategic calculations hardened with each treaty and harbor improvement. In the age of coal and cables, Hawaii's location was not merely convenient, it was central. U.S. naval planners flagged the islands as indispensable to Pacific defense and commerce. British and Japanese observers took their own notes. Within this geometry, the kingdom's diplomacy had to thread narrow channels, invite trade without inviting tutelage, assure investors without surrendering control, and modernize without dissolving the cultural and political foundations that made Hawaii Hawaiian. None of this unfolded without resistance. Petition drives, political societies, and a lively Hawaiian language press challenged policies seen as eroding sovereignty and common welfare. Voices argued for reforms that protected both the Crown's prerogatives and the people's rights, warning that concessions made for immediate advantage could mortgage the future. The contest over Hawaii's direction was not hidden. It was printed, sung, and debated in public meeting halls.
Epidemics and demographic shifts darkened the backdrop. Earlier waves of disease had already taken a catastrophic toll. Plantation labor regimes and urbanization introduced new public health challenges. Schools multiplied, but teaching languages and curricula increasingly reflected missionary and commercial priorities. In families and villages, the work of cultural continuity, olelo Hawaii, hula, fishing knowledge, and place-based stewardship continued, though under growing strain from the cash economy and imported laws. By the late 1880s, the kingdom stood at a paradox. Legally modern and internationally recognized, yet internally reweighted so that economic leverage could be converted into political command. The crown remained, the ministries functioned, and treaties fluttered in portfolios, but the balance of power had shifted. It would take only one constitutional crisis, one determined clique, and one display of foreign force to push the system past its design limits.
Next, when a queen reaches for a new constitution, someone brings a gunboat to a paperwork fight. Chapter 4. The Overthrow and Annexation.
In January 1893, Queen Liliuokalani moved to restore a fuller constitutional monarchy. The 1887 Bayonet Constitution had curtailed royal authority and reshaped the electorate in favor of property and foreign influence. After petitions and elections signaled support for reform, the Queen prepared a new constitution intended to rebalance power and reaffirm Hawaiian political rights. It was a legal step debated in cabinet, anticipated by supporters, and dreaded by those whose leverage depended on the 1887 framework. Opponents organized as a committee of safety, an alliance of prominent businessmen, lawyers, and politicians tied to sugar, shipping, and missionary-descended networks. They framed the Queen's move as a threat to order and commerce. Behind closed doors, they coordinated with sympathetic figures in the U.S. legation. The American minister, John L. Stevens, took an extraordinary step. He recognized the committee's self-proclaimed provisional government and requested the landing of U.S. Marines and sailors from the USS Boston. The landing force positioned itself in Honolulu. It did not fire shots, but its presence shifted the balance at a decisive moment. Liliʻuokalani faced a cruel equation. The Royal Guard was loyal, many subjects were ready to resist, yet bloodshed in the capital could invite catastrophe, especially with foreign forces on the street and a minister extending de facto recognition to her opponents. The Queen yielded her authority under protest expressly to the United States, trusting that an investigation would restore constitutional order. Her statement made two things clear. She did not abdicate sovereignty, and she appealed to international norms and U.S. principles to correct what she called a grievous wrong. In Washington, President Grover Cleveland withdrew the annexation treaty that the provisional government had rushed forward. He sent James H. Blount as a special commissioner to investigate. The Blount Report, 1893, described the landing of U.S. forces as unjustified and called the overthrow improper. Cleveland urged restoration of the Queen, but Honolulu's provisional government, led by Sanford B. Dole, refused. A subsequent Senate inquiry, the Morgan Report, 1894, reached a different conclusion, exonerating U.S. officials and shifting responsibility onto local actors. The result was stalemate, moral condemnation from the executive branch, political cover from parts of Congress, and a determined regime in Honolulu tightening its grip. The provisional government declared itself the Republic of Hawaii in 1894, with Dole as president. New laws consolidated control, managed dissent, and prepared the legal ground for annexation. Hawaiian petitions and protests continued. Tens of thousands signed the Kuʻe petitions, 1897, against annexation, while organizers lobbied in Washington to block the necessary two-thirds vote in the U.S. Senate. For a time, they succeeded. A formal treaty could not pass. But events beyond Hawaii shifted the tide. In 1898, the Spanish-American War recast the Pacific. U.S. strategists viewed Hawaii as a vital mid-ocean base for ships and cables. When a treaty remained uncertain, Congress used a different tool, the Newlands Resolution, a joint resolution requiring simple majorities rather than a supermajority. In July 1898, the resolution passed. President McKinley signed it. Formal transfer took place the same year. In 1900, the Organic Act made Hawaii a U.S. territory, transforming Crown and government lands into so-called ceded lands held by the United States. Later, the state of Hawaii, without the consent of the Hawaiian sovereign or people. Annexation was not only a flag change, it rearranged institutions, property, and language. English became the mandatory medium in public schools by law in 1896, accelerating the suppression of ʻōlelo Hawaii in classrooms. Political power concentrated in territorial structures that answered to Washington more than to local consensus. Business interests that had backed the overthrow now operated with the protections of U.S. law and markets. For many Kanaka Maoli, the loss was measured in dispossession and disenfranchisement. For advocates of state building, it was presented as progress and security. Yet, Hawaiian resistance and resilience persisted. Cultural practice moved in families and halau. Newspapers continued to argue the case for rights and memory. Petitions, lawsuits, and later political movements kept the question of justice alive. The story did not end in 1898 or 1900. It continued in courts, classrooms, and communities. Decades later, apologies and acknowledgments would enter official records. But the daily work of repairing language, land, and law fell to organizers, educators, and elders who refused to accept that annexation erased history. The overthrow and annexation can be narrated as a sequence of legal maneuvers, diplomatic cables, and economic incentives. It can also be told as a conflict between a small Pacific kingdom and the strategic appetites of an empire in an age of steam and steel. Both frames are true, and both risk obscuring the human center. A queen who sought lawful reform, citizens who petitioned in their tens of thousands, and communities that navigated loss with intellect, faith, and stubborn continuity.
Next, ukuleles, protest signs, and a certain TV show reminding everyone the crown was real. Chapter 5. Echoes in Modern Culture.
Hawaii's story did not end with annexation. It changed channels. In the late 20th century, a cultural renaissance brought ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi back into classrooms, hula and mele back into the open, and voyaging knowledge back onto the ocean in double-hulled canoes. Activists challenged bombing on Kahoʻolawe and defended Mauna Kea. Teachers built immersion schools. Navigators rebuilt sea roads. Out of that long revival comes a simple global fact. For millions of people, the screen is now the first teacher, which means that popular dramatizations carry unusual weight. Enter Apple TV Plus's Chief of War. Framed through Kaʻiana, warrior, traveler, and eventual defector, the series promises an indigenous lens, extensive dialogue in ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, and a Polynesian-led cast and crew. It is the most visible attempt yet to move Hawaii's unification from postcards and footnotes into a living world of law, protocol, and hard choices. In this chapter, we use the archive like a lantern. We'll point where the show aligns with historical record, where it compresses or takes license, and how to watch it critically without losing the joy of a good story. What the series gets right. Screen and sources agree. The Four Kingdom chessboard. Hawaii, Maui, Oʻahu, and Kauai did form a real and shifting power map in the late 18th century. Alliances, marriages, and rivalries shaped every campaign and council. Innovation without erasure. Muskets, cannon, and foreign advisors appear alongside koa warriors and canoes. That mix mirrors accounts of the time. New tools added reach and shock, but seamanship, formations, and logistics still decided outcomes. Kaʻiana's arc in broad strokes. A high-ranking Aliʻi, Kaʻiana travels, fights with Kamehameha, then, after court tensions and exclusion from planning, defects to Oʻahu's side and dies during the Nu'uanu campaign. The pivot is documented, even if motives are debated. Nu'uanu's terrain and stakes. Artillery matters. Heights matter. Panic near the Pali turns a retreat into a rout. The battle is the keystone of Oʻahu's fall and the pathway to eventual unification. Hawaiian language and protocol. Hearing formal speech, chant, and court ceremony in Hawaiian re-centers the political world as Hawaiians themselves would have heard and enacted it.
Where drama probably bends the record. A single hero's lens. Centering Kaʻiana clarifies the plot, but can flatten the council-driven nature of chiefly politics. Many decisions were collective, negotiated, or ritual-bounded. Clean motives, quick turns. On screen, defections and betrayals arrive with crisp causes. In sources, reasons overlap: status anxieties, prophetic fears, perceived slights, strategic calculations. Timeline compression. Campaigns fought over months or years can unfold in a single episode. Rituals, logistics, and weather windows are streamlined to get to the clash. Composite or boosted characters. To keep arcs tidy, the series appears to merge or magnify certain figures and court factions. This is a common device, but not how the record reads line by line. Set-piece spectacle. Shark wrestling, prolonged duels, and tidily choreographed melees play well on television. Eyewitness-grounded histories emphasize formations, flanking, artillery positioning, and morale. A heroic logline versus a complicated life. Promotional copy that frames Kaʻiana as on a mission to unite his homeland collides with a documented defection and death opposing Kamehameha at Nu'uanu. The lived story is more tragic and more interesting than a straight hero's journey. Comparisons you'll see us make on screen with receipts. Language. The show's extensive use of ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi and protocol aligns with how courts and chiefs actually spoke and moved. It's a genuine corrective to decades of English-only portrayals. Foreign advisors. Depictions of men like John Young and Isaac Davis elsewhere, training gunnery and tactics match the sources, though the series may over-isolate their influence relative to Hawaiian commanders who integrated new tools into existing doctrine. The Battle of Nu'uanu. Expect accurate terrain and the decisive role of artillery on the valley heights. Also expect stylized hero combats that the archive doesn't guarantee. Kaʻiana's defection.
The show renders it as a dramatic break. The record preserves multiple reasons: exclusion from a war council, fear for his standing or safety, court rivalries. We'll lay those sources side by side. Kauai's endgame. If future seasons hint at or depict the final unification, note that Kauai joins by diplomacy under Kaumaʻaliʻi in 1810 rather than by conquest, a major historical beat that often surprises first-time audiences.
How to watch critically without losing the magic.
Enjoy the scale. Seeing canoes under full sail, feather capes, and heiau ceremonies at true size resets the imagination. Keep that sense of awe. Follow the paperwork. Constitutions, land commissions, petitions, and court cases are the quiet machinery of the kingdom. Whenever the show skips them, remember they still turned the gears. Track who gets to speak. If a scene leans on one man's revelation, ask which voices the archive preserves. Female chiefs, like Kaʻahumanu, priests, commoners, foreign consuls, Hawaiian language newspaper editors, and what their versions add. Remember, the map extends past the postcard. The arc doesn't end at the Pali. It runs onto failed invasions of Kauai, epidemics, diplomacy, and a peaceful submission that completed the unification in 1810. Why this matters beyond the credits. The series can widen the gate. Millions will discover that Hawaii had treaties, constitutions, courts, literacy, and ministers traveling oceans on the kingdom's business. But spectacle is not a syllabus. When dramatization rushes, we slow down. When a scene simplifies, we add the missing gears. And when the show gets something right, language, protocol, political complexity, we'll say so, because accuracy deserves praise as loudly as error deserves correction. Closing thought and invitation. Popular storytelling can honor a nation's memory or pave over it. Our promise in this film is to keep the archive lit while we enjoy the show. After the episode ends, let's talk. What felt true? What felt tidy? And which questions you want the record to answer next.
Next, cast your vote, join the crew, and tell us whether the sword fights or the sources stole the scene before we sail into the epilogue.
Support the series by becoming a member or visiting our shop. Drop your takeaway below and tell us what the show got right.
Watch the America playlist next to keep the story flowing. Take care and see you in the next chapter.
Across voyaging routes and courtrooms, petitions, and battlefields, the Hawaiian Kingdom emerges as more than a backdrop to paradise. It was a sovereign state built on knowledge of stars, seas, seasons, laws, and defended by leaders who tried to read a changing world as carefully as they read the tide. Its fall did not erase its fingerprints. They remain in place, names and protocols, in archives and songs, in families who kept language and ceremony alive when politics tried to quiet them. The record shows how design and chants traveled together. Innovation served tradition when it strengthened stewardship. It broke trust when it excused extraction. Diplomacy extended dignity across oceans. It also brought appetites that could not be bargained away. The same documents that proved a modern state, constitutions, court opinions, land awards, became the levers by which power shifted. That tension is the thread we followed. A kingdom thinking in law and ritual, adapting with intelligence, and then facing forces that measured value in markets and maps. If popular storytelling returns to this past now, in classrooms, on stages, and on screens, it carries an opportunity and a duty. The opportunity is reach. Millions can learn that Hawaii had treaties and newspapers, ministers and ministries, not just beaches and battles. The duty is fidelity. To let Kanaka Maoli voices lead. To distinguish spectacle from evidence. To keep the story complex where the truth is complex, and clear where the record is clear. We close where we began, with the ocean as teacher. The canoe that leaves land must carry its necessities in order: food, water, tools, knowledge, and trust. The kingdom did the same. Some cargo was taken, some was scattered. Yet the route remains charted, and navigators still sail it. A language regrows in schools, a double-hulled canoe crosses oceans, a chant is taught, and with it, the names of winds. Memory is not a monument, it is a practice. Nothing we have shown asks the past to be perfect. It asks us to be honest. To say that a queen sought lawful reform, that citizens petitioned in their tens of thousands, that annexation reordered land and power, that communities endured and continue to rebuild what is theirs to keep. To say that a series can open a door and that the archive can light the room, and to admit that we are still learning how to hear the sources with the attention they require. If this documentary has done its work, it has widened the picture, beyond postcard and battlefield, beyond a single hero or a single law.